What is going on, everyone, and welcome to WreckTalk. Now, yesterday we rightfully so made fun of Dog Nation. That's a complete embarrassment to any person that's ever got on a microphone and talked about college football. Not the point of today's video, though. The point of today's video is not to trash talk. This is my most objective view that I can give of this game. So I've got the stats that I find interesting on the screen. Some things of note, a lot of similarities in this team. Third down offense, both middle of the pack, 70, 64th, and both teams are doing great on defense getting off the field at third down. So both teams struggling to maintain drives on third down, but on defense doing well. Georgia Tech at 11th, Georgia at 14th getting off the field. Now, I know what a lot of Georgia fans are going to say. I looked up, I looked up the strength of schedule per one source. They had UGA as the 9th in strength of schedule, Georgia Tech at 34th. So it's not like Georgia Tech has the easiest schedule known to man. It's a pretty difficult schedule. Fewest penalties. Surprised me to see that Georgia, middle of the pack in penalties. They're about 73rd in penalties this season. Georgia Tech in the top 25 at 22nd. Georgia's also been very hit and miss in turnovers, and that kind of goes along with Carson Beck. Wasn't long ago Georgia fans were ready to throw Carson Beck up under a dumpster somewhere, bring in the next guy, fire Mike Bobo, but has been a turnover machine at times, been very hit and miss, very good against Tennessee, not very good against Ole Miss and Alabama, right? Georgia is the tale of two cities on offense, too. 9th overall in passing yardage, 98th in the country, Georgia is, in rushing yards a game at 130. To give credit to Georgia, they've really established themselves as running back U. They've had a ton of really good running backs come out of there. It's surprising to see them at the bottom of the pack in rush offense. Now, they've had a ton of injuries at the running back position. It's one of the questions coming into this game, probably, as far as what is the injury situation in some different spots for Georgia. The thing is, Georgia Tech is as, if not more, banged up at running back than Georgia is. Tech has a gimped up Jamal Haynes. Chad Alexander's been hurt. Trey Cooley has been hurt. We've basically been having to put in 4th and 5th string running backs, as well as a ton of injuries at tight end. Now, it's never an excuse. That's why depth matters, and Georgia obviously has the advantage as far as depth of roster is concerned. And that could very well come into play in this game. Defensively, some of these stats I think are deceptive. Georgia is 38th in rush defense, giving up 124 yards a game, which is probably far worse than they've been in the past. It just seems like more recently in the back half of the season, Georgia's really struggled to stop the run. Even Tennessee staying in the game for as long as they did was off the back of Sampson. They were able to run pretty well on Georgia. Even last week against UMass, UMass should not have ran for 226 yards against Georgia. I think any Georgia fan would probably agree. Yeah, we got to play much, much better run defense, but it is good enough for the 15th overall total defense and the 34th overall total offense. Georgia Tech 41st and 46th, respectively. Now, I'm going to bring in the whiteboard. We're going to talk about kind of key stats, keys of the game, big questions of the game, etc. But we have to talk about the narrative surrounding this game. So I think on both sides, people say this year feels different. It's on a Friday. It's going to be in a primetime spot on a Friday. It's going to be a night game at Sanford Stadium. And Georgia Tech is coming off the heels. Obviously, they struggled with NC State last week. But coming off the heels of a massive key victory for Brent Key, a top 5 win over Miami, who had the number 1 offense in the country. Miami was number 1, I think, in every stat except maybe rushing offense. Georgia Tech able to hold them to 23 points and get a big win. Goalposts come down. And it feels like, look, if Georgia Tech can hold the number one passing offense to 23 points, then could they hold the ninth ranked Georgia offense to something similar? I think that's what makes this game interesting. I've seen a lot of Georgia fans coming out and saying, hey, could be a real competitive game this year, could come down to the wire. It was very competitive last year. I even listened to Kirby Smart's post-game press conference talking about how physical Georgia Tech is. And here's the main thing that I think makes this rivalry interesting now is that what is the importance of rivalry games? A big factor in rivalry games is recruiting. Alabama, Auburn, Ohio State, Michigan, they're all recruiting the same players, and it gives you a recruiting boost if you can get a big win over your rival when you're both recruiting the same player. All of a sudden, and this is Georgia Tech's fault. The reason the rivalry has not been competitive in the past is because Georgia Tech hasn't held up their end of the bargain, right? It's just a fact of the matter. Georgia, I get not thinking much about the rivalry game, especially when we're coming off the heels of not only, in my opinion, the worst head coach Georgia Tech's ever had, but the worst head coach in the history of college football. All of a sudden, Georgia Tech is hitting on some hires with Brent Key, J-Bat at AD. If you didn't know, Georgia Tech just raised $300 million of a $500 million fundraising initiative, renovating the stadium. All of a sudden being very competitive in NIL offerings to kids. Georgia Tech and Georgia were fighting over Linton. Georgia ends up getting him, but it looked like it came down to the wire between Georgia and Georgia Tech. Christian Garrett, a kid that Georgia's also recruiting, is currently, committed to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's flipping top 50 national recruits from teams like Clemson. We just flipped a kid from Louisville. So, in my opinion, that's what starts to make this rivalry just different, right? Is the recruiting aspect behind it in conjunction with Georgia Tech's just a much better team. They're a better team this year than they were last year. Now, the tough thing is, and we'll talk about it when we get the board up, some of these matchups, the number one thing is who's going to start this game. Haynes King did not look good last week against NC State. Haynes King cannot throw more than maybe 2 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. So whenever you have Haynes King come in, you know that 80% of the playbook's out. You don't have to worry about a downfield passing threat. You can just aggressively attack the line of scrimmage, not worry about the ball coming back over the top. NC State exposed that. Georgia Tech tried to run that against NC State. Did not work. And if NC State can stop it, I've got no doubts that Georgia will blow it up as well. I think most likely Philo will start this game. He will play 85 to 90% of the snaps in this game. And Haynes King will be brought in situationally like he was in the fourth quarter of the NC State game to run read option or stuff. Now, interestingly enough, UMass was able to run a lot of read options to great effect against Georgia, and that seems to be part of kind of the ails in the rushing defense for Georgia is that they've kind of struggled with that quick option game. As far as Georgia's concerned, which version of Carson Beck are you getting? Has Carson Beck put the turnover back behind him? That's going to be a major factor in this game. The turnover battle, who wins the turnover battle, who wins the special teams battle. I think it's going to be probably a closer game than most people think. If you're speaking kind of in a non-trash talking way, the line opened up at 20.5. It's now moved to 19.5. It's going to be no secret. I'm sure Georgia would like to come out and run the ball, but if they can start this game, get an early lead with throwing right up the seams, basically like they did against Tennessee, and get ahead and maintain, I'm sure they'll do that. Georgia Tech wants to come out, run the ball, control clock, and keep Georgia Tech's Georgia's offense off the field. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Again, this is the other weird thing is this is a Friday night game. This is something that both teams agreed to a year ago. I'm sure Kirby agreed to it because he wants a night game at home for clean old-fashioned hate. Georgia Tech agreed to it for exposure, right? It is technically a short week for Georgia. It's a longer week for Georgia Tech because they played a Thursday night game coming in. Who knows how, that might affect things. I look back at the past 5 recruiting classes for Georgia, though, and I don't think that they've, if I remember right, had a class worse than third. So Georgia's going to have a massive, massive talent advantage in this, you know, and they're going to have a massive depth advantage in this. So though they are on a short week, I don't think that that's the difference in the game or anything. But let's bring the board in. Let's look at some key stats, keys to victory, things to watch out for. All right, so let's get into the board. Key stats. First, Georgia Tech's third down defense, 11th in the country. If Georgia Tech can get off the field on defense, limit the Georgia offense, especially as we're going to look at in the passing offense, going to be a good day for Georgia Tech. Now, a key matchup, Georgia Tech secondary versus the wide receiver core for Georgia. Georgia Tech has struggled this year defending the pass, especially if you go back and watch games like when we played Syracuse. Kyle McCord almost had 300 yards before the first half. Now, I think he's leading the country in passing yards, but 68th ranked Georgia Tech pass defense going against the 9th ranked pass offense in the country in Georgia. That's a key matchup to watch out for. Also, rush offense for Georgia Tech versus the rush defense. This game is probably going to come down to, as all games do, the line of scrimmage. But if Georgia is to dominate this game, it will come off the back of their defensive line. If they can be disruptive, meet backs in the backfield, get pressure on a young freshman quarterback, Georgia Tech probably doesn't have much of a chance in this game. Those are some things to watch out for there. Big question. We talked about it earlier. Who plays quarterback? Does Georgia Tech try to run the 2 quarterback system with Haynes King and Philo? As I said, I don't really think so. I think Philo has proven that he can come out and get the start. And if he has time, he can make big plays. And as I've said in other videos, if you don't know much about Aaron Philo, he is young. He doesn't have like elite arm strength necessarily or any of the intangibles like that would just stick out to you. But he's a playmaker. If he has time, he's going to find the open guy, and he can definitely hurt you throwing downfield. And as NC State showed, if you're just going to play cover 2 over top, man underneath, and you give him a running lane, he'll take off there too and pick up 20 or 30. For Georgia, which version of Carson Beck shows up? Does Carson Beck have 0 turnovers in this game? Does he have 2? Does he have 1? Does he have 3? If Carson Beck throws a lot of picks in this game, or if Georgia loses a turnover battle, that's how underdogs like Georgia Tech win these games, right? This is how you get beat as a favorite. So what does the play of Carson Beck look like in this game? UGA injuries. So what's the running back situation for Georgia? I think you've had several players on defense with some key injuries. So how healthy is Georgia coming into this game? Now, both Brent Key and Kirby Smart are super close to the vest with injuries. They usually don't say anything about injuries unless it's a season-ending injury. So we'll have to see who shows up for both teams. And then I put UGA's run D. Can they shut down the go-to, the game plan for Georgia Tech is the same every week. Come out and run the ball, right? Okay, let's move over here a little bit. Keys to victory. So let's start with Georgia. First and foremost, we just talked about it. Stop the run. In fact, I think Josh Pate calls it a keystone stat, which is if you only had one stat, you could get before the game is played that would tell you who wins. What would it be? I think it's rushing yards for Georgia Tech. If you hold Georgia Tech to under probably 115 rushing yards or so, very, very likely Georgia wins this game. So step number 1 for Georgia, stop the run. 2, pressure Philo. Philo is young. He's a true freshman quarterback. He probably will burn his red shirt in this game. You cannot let him get comfortable. As I just said, if he has time to find an open guy, he will find an open guy. If you allow him to hurt you with his feet, he will, though he's not the most mobile guy. Game plan for Georgia should be ton of pressure, probably a lot of aggressively called defenses, and really don't give Philo time to find his footing in a hostile road environment in Sanford Stadium. Number 3, offensively for Georgia, get ahead and get ahead early. I think ideally Georgia would like to come out and flex the passing game, get ahead by 10 or 14 early, and really make it difficult for Georgia Tech to claw their way back in with a 15th ranked Georgia defense. Now, for Georgia Tech, number 1, establish the run. If Georgia Tech runs for like 200 plus in this game, I think very likely Georgia Tech wins this game because they'll just get to control the clock and keep Carson Beck's arm and that receiving core off the field. So Georgia Tech's probably going to have to be creative in how they create running lanes for the running backs, pop passes to Eric Singleton Jr., who's a track star. How healthy is Jamal Haynes running off tackle, etc. So number 1 thing for Georgia Tech in this game is they need to get probably 180 or more rushing yards to be in a spot to win this game. Number 2, pressure Beck. Georgia Tech has to limit the passing yards and the explosive plays in the passing game in the same way they did against Miami. Now, if they can do it against Miami, and I'm sure there's a ton of Georgia fans that they just think they're head and shoulders better passing the ball than Miami. I don't think it's the case, though. Can Georgia Tech do it against 2 different teams? We'll have to see in this game. Tyler Santucci, who is in his first year as Georgia Tech defensive coordinator, has shown that he can be very creative. Kirby actually talked about it in his press conference yesterday in disguising coverages, disguising blitz packages. So whatever tricks he's got in his bag defensively, he's got to bring them out. And also the Georgia Tech defensive line that struggled really getting after the passer earlier in the year is doing a much, much better job in the second half of the year. And number 3, we already talked about it, how do underdogs win games like this on the road? Turnovers and special teams plays. Can Georgia Tech turn field position or get a score in special teams? Can they get a blocked kick or a blocked field goal? Can they win the turnover battle? So I think it probably takes 2 of these things. I think Georgia Tech has to win the turnover battle, and they have to get over 180 rushing yards. So I said I was out of the business of doing score predictions. If I had to give a score prediction, we'll make some space here. It's going to be a tough environment on the road in Athens in a night environment. It's going to be very loud. Could have communication issues. For a Georgia Tech offense, really on both sides of the ball, Georgia Tech has struggled and had to burn timeouts, communication, even when they're playing at home. So, all right. So I realize after putting all this together that I gave my score prediction was last year's score, which I didn't mean to do, but doesn't seem all that creative, does it? So this year's score prediction, I think it's going to be closer than most people think. I don't think Georgia covers. I am probably going to take the under, what is it, 51.5 or something like that. We'll go Georgia Tech 17. We'll give some respect to Georgia's defense, and we'll go UGA 23. All right. Also, if you know the WreckTalk lore and what is very weird about what I just did, comment below. Comment anyways. Comment on the video. Give it a like. Give it a subscribe. Whatever. Be interested to see what happens in clean old-fashioned hate this year. And look, there's my score prediction.
WreckTalk, the greatest offense in mind. Jeff Collins dodging cage fight, scared out of his mind. Marching forward, fighting strong, loud and proud. Jack and Swarming, kicking ass, they're shouting loud. To hell with Georgia, we don't give a damn. What's the good word? Piss on out, piss on out. It don't take 7 years of college to learn. Wreck is the greatest Georgia Tech fan in the land. To hell with Georgia, we don't give a damn. What's the good word? Piss on out, piss on out. It don't take 7 years of college to learn. Once the good work is on out,